She had 48 hours before her life ended. He gave her a way out, but the price was living with the one man who had never stopped haunting her. Have you ever been so desperate that you would make a deal with the one person you swore you would never see again? Mira Castellano was about to lose everything she had spent 5 years building: her career, her reputation, her freedom. Someone had framed her perfectly. Every detail was precise. Every piece of evidence pointed directly at her, and the walls were closing in fast. But when her salvation walked through that door wearing a suit and carrying secrets from 7 years ago, she realized the real danger was not prison. It was him. If you have ever felt trapped between impossible choices, hit that like button and stick around, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The email arrived at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Mira was still at her desk, still working, because that was what she did. That was who she was. The woman who stayed late. The woman who double-checked every calculation. The woman who built her entire identity on being beyond reproach. The subject line was simple: disciplinary review scheduled. She opened it. Read the first line, then the second, then stopped breathing altogether. Breach of ethics protocol. Evidence submitted. Hearing scheduled in 48 hours. The attachment loaded slowly, as if the universe wanted to give her one more second before everything changed. When it finally opened, she saw her name, her access codes, her digital signature on 17 transactions she had never authorized, transfers to accounts she had never seen, amounts that made her vision blur just reading them. Corporate espionage, fraud, theft, all of it documented with a kind of meticulous precision that made it look like she had spent months planning it, like she had built the evidence trail herself, carefully, deliberately, with the same attention to detail she brought to every project she touched. 5 years. She had given this firm 5 years of her life. 16-hour days in studios that smelled like coffee and ambition. Weekends sacrificed. Relationships that withered because she was always working, always building, always proving she deserved to be there. She had turned down dinners with her mother. She had missed her cousin's wedding. She had made herself indispensable, because being indispensable meant being safe. And someone had turned all of that into a weapon against her. Her phone buzzed. A message from her lawyer, the one she had retained 6 months ago when the first whispers started, back when this was just uncomfortable office politics, back when she thought she could manage it. His message was brief and devastating. They have documentation. This goes beyond the firm now. Regulatory board. Involved. Mira closed her laptop with the careful precision of someone who had learned that falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. She had learned that lesson early, learned it at 12 when her father had his first stroke, and her mother's hands shook too much to sign the hospital paperwork. Learned it at 16 when she worked catering events in a borrowed uniform so she could pay for portfolio materials. Learned it at 21 when she left graduate school without saying goodbye, because staying would have meant choosing love over survival, and she had never been able to afford that choice. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, saw the woman she had built herself into, sharp, controlled, unbreakable. 48 hours. The hearing was held in the main conference room, all glass and steel, and the kind of architectural intimidation that was designed to make you feel small. Mira wore her black suit, the one that made her look older than 26, more established than she felt. She had learned early that armor came in many forms. Marcus Chen was already seated when she arrived, her department head, the man who had personally recruited her from graduate school with promises about mentorship and trajectory, and a future that looked nothing like this room, this moment, this systematic destruction of everything she had built. He was not looking at her now. None of them were, not directly. There was a particular kind of not looking that happened when someone was being dismantled in front of witnesses. That careful study of documents, that sudden fascination with hands, that desperate search for anything to focus on that, was not her face. Around the table sat 6 people, 2 from compliance, 3 from legal, Marcus, all of them positioned with the careful distance of people who were already protecting themselves from association. The evidence was presented by someone from legal she did not recognize, a woman in her 40s with reading glasses and a voice that held no emotion whatsoever, just facts, just documentation, just the careful recitation of Mira's professional execution, her access codes, used to authorize transfers she had never made, her approval sequences, logged at times she could not account for, 17 transactions, each one building on the last, a pattern so clean it looked intentional, looked planned, looked exactly like something Mira Castellano would do if Mira Castellano were the kind of person who committed corporate fraud, which, according to every piece of evidence in front of them, she was. The woman from legal slid a printed report across the table. Mira did not pick it up, did not need to. She had already seen it, had spent 72 hours staring at it, trying to find the flaw, the mistake, the thread she could pull that would unravel the whole thing. There was none. Whoever had built this had studied her, known her routines, anticipated her movements. They had been patient, thorough, professional. They had framed her perfectly. Marcus cleared his throat. Given the severity of the findings, the regulatory board has been notified. You have 24 hours to retain legal representation before formal charges are filed. Mira kept her face exactly where it needed to be, back straight, hands flat on the table, every wall she had ever built firmly in place. The most dangerous thing she could do right now was let any of them see it landing. She had spent 72 hours trying to find a way out of this, had called her lawyer, had reached out to her contact at the regulatory board, had messaged 3 colleagues who suddenly had very full schedules and very brief responses. Every door she had built access to over 5 years had closed quietly, without explanation, leaving her standing in a room that was getting smaller by the second. The conference room door opened. 2 officers walked in, not firm security, not human resources, the kind of authority that did not need to announce itself because the uniforms did it first. One of them looked at Marcus, said something low, something Mira could not hear but understood immediately in the way Marcus's face changed, in the way his eyes cut to her, and then away, like he could not quite manage the eye contact. They were not giving her 24 hours. They were here to take her now. Her life was collapsing in real time, and she was watching it happen with the detached observation of someone who had left her body entirely. She stood up, slowly, with the dignity of someone who refused to be dragged. One of the officers stepped toward her, reaching for the badge at his belt, and the conference room door opened again. The room changed before she understood why. A physical change, like air pressure dropping before a storm, like gravity shifting, like everything in the space suddenly had to reorganize itself around something new, someone new. He was followed by 2 people in suits and preceded by a silence that arrived half a second before he did. One of his team placed documents in front of Marcus without breaking stride. Another positioned himself quietly near the officers with the efficient stillness of someone who had already made calls that outranked everyone in this room. Mira felt him before she saw him. That pull in the air, that shift in attention her body had been carrying since she was 18 years old and had never once put down. Her body recognized it before her mind caught up, and she resented that immediately and completely. She looked up. Dominic Vale, 28 years old, same as her, but wearing it differently than anyone had a right to. The jaw was harder than she remembered, sharper. The shoulders carried something 10 years had not been there to carry. The dark eyes moved across the room with the quiet efficiency of someone cataloging everything worth knowing in under 3 seconds. And then they found her and stopped. Everything else in the room kept moving. The officers shifting their weight, Marcus half rising from his chair, the legal team exchanging glances. All of it continued in its normal orbit, completely unbothered. For Mira, it all went still, because she knew this man, not the way you know a name or a face, not the way you know someone you went to school with once upon a time. She knew him the way you know something that got under your skin at 18 and never fully came back out. Dominic Vale, the only person who had ever matched her in every class they shared and made her furious about it. Cold where she was sharp, precise where she was relentless. 2 years of graduate school rivalry that everyone around them could see. What nobody saw was the other thing underneath it, that his eyes found her before they found anything else in every room they entered together, that her pulse did something inconvenient every time he looked at her with that particular focus, that they were 21 and proud, and the word for what lived underneath all that rivalry was one neither of them was willing to say first, that they were in love with each other until one night they did not have to say it. A study session running late, an empty library floor, 2 people who had spent 2 years finding excuses to be near each other, finally running out of excuses, It lasted longer than seconds, but felt just as brief, his hand against the wall beside her head, her breath stopping completely, a kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like a confirmation of something that had always been true, and both of them had been too stubborn to admit. Neither of them spoke about it the next morning. 2 weeks later, Mira was gone from school. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye. Just gone. Between one semester and the next, like she had decided he was not worth a backward glance. 7 years now, and he was standing in her conference room, looking at her like the decade between them was a distance he could fold in half without effort, like she was still the most interesting problem he had ever encountered. His team had the officers handled, documents exchanged. Something said quietly, the authority in the room superseded by greater authority. Marcus was standing. The compliance officers were moving toward the door. The legal team gathering their materials with the practiced efficiency of people who recognized when they had been outmaneuvered. Dominic looked at her across the emptying room. 60 seconds later, there were 2 people in the conference room and a silence with 7 years of weight pressing down on every inch of it. He did not sit, hands in his pockets, looking at her across the table like he had all the time in the world and fully intended to use it. Mira did not move either. "You bought my firm," she said. "Yes. This morning. Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Something that had been there at 21 and was still there now, older and more controlled and considerably more dangerous for it. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a document on the table between them. Clean, already prepared. Her name already typed at the signature line. The fact that it was already prepared told her more than anything he had said so far. "The charges disappear," he said. "The blackmailer disappears. Your name is cleared. Every door that closed in the last 72 hours opens." Mira looked at the document, then at him. And you move into my penthouse. 6 months. You quit your job publicly. You are my girlfriend. We are seen together. You let me handle this." The room was very quiet. "And if I say no?" Dominic leaned forward slightly. "Your name goes on a fraud record. You go to prison. Everything you spent 5 years building follows you out that door." His eyes held hers without flinching. "That is the alternative." Mira held his gaze. She thought about the officers who had been 3 steps away from taking her out of this room. She thought about the evidence that had her name on every page. She thought about 5 years of work evaporating like it had never existed. She reached for the pen and signed her name in the steady hand of a woman who had learned a long time ago that falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. Then she slid the document back across the table without a word. He picked it up without looking at it. Already looking at the window like her signature was something he had stopped tracking before she even reached for the pen. His car was waiting at the building entrance. She did not ask how he knew she would need one. There were a lot of things she did not ask on the drive to her apartment. How long he had known about the fraud, why he had come himself, why the contract had been written before she agreed to anything. She looked out the window and kept her hands still in her lap, and the city moved past, unbothered. Her apartment took 15 minutes to pack, 1 bag, the essentials, the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to travel light. Dominic stood in the doorway of her bedroom with his hands in his pockets while she moved between the wardrobe and the bed, and she was aware of him the way she had always been aware of him, that particular quality of his attention that made her conscious of every movement. She reached up for something on the top shelf. Her sleeve slipped back. She grabbed what she needed and turned around. His eyes were on her wrist, then her face, then very, very still, the stillness that was worse than any reaction she could have predicted. "What happened?" He said. "Caught it on the doorframe last week," she said. "I am clumsy when I am stressed." She pulled her sleeve down, kept her voice even, met his eyes with the practiced neutrality of someone who had been lying about injuries since she was 16 and working catering shifts that paid under the table. Dominic looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than it should have, the look of a man cataloging something carefully, storing it away in a place he fully intended to return to. Then he picked up her bag and walked out without another word. In the car, neither of them spoke. Mira looked straight ahead. Dominic looked at the road. One thought moved through him that he kept completely off his face. It better be what she said it was, because if it was not, whoever had put that mark on her was going to find out very quickly what it meant to touch something that belonged to him. It was the kind of promise that did not need words, the kind that was never going to be broken anyway. She was in his penthouse now. Whatever came next, she was safe. A woman named Elena met them at the elevator, showed Mira to a room at the end of the west corridor without making eye contact, and left before Mira could ask where anything was. She stood in the middle of the room with her bag, and the feeling of a person who had just made a decision they could not unmake. The room was warm, not the default temperature of climate control, warm in the specific way she kept her own apartment. The exact setting she had adjusted in every place she had ever lived until it was precisely right. She stood there, looking at the thermostat on the wall, at the number on the display, 71 degrees. She had never told anyone that number. On the bedside table sat a box of the tea she drank when she could not sleep. Not a common brand. The particular small batch blend she ordered from a roastery in Portland, because nowhere in Chicago carried it. The one she had discovered 3 years ago during a sleepless week, when a project was falling apart and she needed something, anything, to quiet her mind. It was sitting there like it had always been there, like someone had simply known to put it there before she arrived. Like the question of what Mira Castellano needed in a room she had never slept in had been answered some time ago by someone with no reasonable way of knowing the answer. She picked up the box, set it back down. Her hands were not quite steady. She went to find Dominic. He was in the kitchen, reading something on his phone, jacket off, sleeves pushed to the elbows, looking entirely unbothered. He did not look up when she walked in. "The temperature in my room," she said. He turned a page on whatever he was reading. "What about it? And the tea?" He looked up then, held her gaze with the complete neutrality of a man who had been waiting for this conversation. "You have a preferred temperature," he said. "The tea helps you sleep. These are not complicated things to know about a person. I never told you either of them." "No," he agreed, and looked back at his phone. Mira stood in his kitchen and felt the specific irritation of being understood by someone she had never given permission to understand her. It sat wrong, like finding a door open in a room she was certain she had locked. She wanted to be angry about it, could not locate the clean edge of the anger, because underneath the irritation was something else she had even less interest in examining. She turned to go back to her room. "Mira," she stopped, did not turn around. "You are not a guest here," Dominic said. His voice was even. "You do not have to perform. Not in this apartment." She stood in the doorway with her back to him for a moment, her spine straight, her shoulders exactly where they needed to be. "I was not performing." "I know," he said. "That is not what I said." She turned around then, looked at him across the kitchen. He was looking at her with that same steady patience, and she looked back, and for one unguarded second, something in her wanted to say something sharp, something that would put them back on familiar ground, something with teeth. The reflex of 2 years of rivalry firing before she remembered where she was and what she was carrying and how tired she actually was. She looked away first. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She was asleep before 10, the first real sleep she had managed in 5 days, deep and dreamless, and longer than she had intended. She did not hear Dominic move through the apartment in the hours after, did not hear him stop outside her door for a moment before continuing to the window at the end of the hall. He stood there for a long time. Her light was dark at the end of the corridor, the apartment quiet around him. His lawyer had sent her full file to his phone 3 hours ago. Professional history, financial records, everything assembled with the thoroughness he required of anyone who worked for him. He had not opened it. He already knew what he needed to know, had known it since she had reached for that pen in the conference room and signed her name without letting her hand shake, had known it since she had stood in her bedroom doorway with her sleeve pulled down and her eyes steady and lied to his face about a mark on her wrist that had nothing to do with a door frame. Her light was dark at the end of the corridor. This had never been about the firm. It had never been about any of it. Are you Team Dominic or Team This Man is Unhinged? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is only the beginning. 4 days passed. Mira found her rhythm in the penthouse, started leaving her shoes by the kitchen door instead of lying neatly in her room, stopped saying thank you every time Elena left something in the common areas, began to occupy the space like she had a right to it, which technically, for the next 6 months, she did. Dominic watched all of it, without appearing to watch any of it. He had always been good at that. In graduate school, she used to catch him sometimes. The slight angle of his attention when he thought she was not looking. The way he always knew which direction she would come from before she arrived. It had infuriated her at 21. It infuriated her now, in a way that was becoming harder to distinguish from something else entirely. On the fourth morning, he told her to get dressed. They were going out. The cafe was the kind of place that did not have prices on the menu. Outdoor seating under a pergola wrapped in late spring green. The kind of calculated casual that cost more than most people spent on groceries. Dominic ordered for himself without opening the menu they were given, which she expected. What she did not expect was when he closed hers as well and told the server what she would have, not checking with her first, not asking, just ordering in the same unhurried tone he used for everything. She waited until the server left. "I am capable of reading a menu." "I know," Dominic said, and picked up his coffee. The food arrived 12 minutes later. She looked at her plate, at the combination in front of her: poached eggs over sourdough, avocado, heirloom tomatoes, a side of fruit cut into precise pieces, exactly the way she ordered breakfast when she was treating herself, when she had time, when she was not eating protein bars at her desk at 6 in the morning, something she had mentioned exactly once, in passing, during a late-night study session when they were 21, a conversation she barely remembered having, something about her mother making breakfast on Sundays when Mira was young, before things got complicated, before the strokes and the medical bills and the careful rationing of everything, including joy. She had mentioned it once, 7 years ago, in the context of something else entirely, and he had remembered. Her jaw tightened. She picked up her fork, did not ask, did not give him the satisfaction of asking. He watched her take the first bite with an expression that was as close to satisfaction as she had seen on him. She looked up. "Stop that." "Stop what?" "Looking like that." "I am not looking like anything," Dominic said, and almost smiled. She looked back at her plate. The irritation from the past 4 days compressed into something colder and more complicated. The tea, the temperature, and now this. This was not recent intelligence. He had not researched her preferences last week or last month. He had been carrying a 7-year-old offhand comment about food for 7 years without apparently deciding to put it down. She did not know what to do with that. Was not sure she wanted to know. Her phone buzzed against the table. She saw the name on the screen before she could stop herself from seeing it. She picked up the phone, pushed back her chair, moved toward the cafe entrance with her back to Dominic, and her voice dropped to something controlled and quiet. The call lasted 6 minutes. She spent most of it saying very little. Yes, she understood. She was handling it. He did not need to. No, really, she had it under control. When she came back to the table, Dominic was looking at his phone. He did not ask, did not look up immediately, and when he did, his expression was exactly where he kept it, neutral, unhurried, giving her nothing. She sat down, picked up her fork. He said nothing, but she felt it, the weight of his attention shifting in the way it had shifted in the bedroom doorway when he had looked at her wrist, the same careful storage of something he intended to return to. She kept her eyes on her plate and her posture where she needed it, and neither of them spoke, and the silence between them had a texture that had not been there before. They walked back to the penthouse afterward. The morning was cool, the kind of Chicago spring that could not decide what it wanted to be. 4 blocks of near silence punctuated by one exchange about nothing important, a comment she made without thinking, something with an edge to it. The natural sharpness of her returning, now that she had slept and eaten, and 4 days of relative safety, had started doing what safety does. Dominic answered without missing a beat. Sharp, dry, perfectly calibrated, like he had been waiting for her to come back to herself and had simply been patient about it. She looked at him sideways. He looked straight ahead. She felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight since the conference room. Not resolved, not named, just slightly less tightly wound than before. That afternoon, she was sitting on the couch with her laptop when she mentioned it, offhandedly, not meaning to, the way you say things that are simply true and run out of your mouth before you have decided whether to say them. That she used to work at her aunt's restaurant when she was younger, summers mostly, hostessing, then serving, then eventually helping with books. It was how she had paid for her portfolio materials in college, how she had managed tuition for the first 2 years before the scholarships kicked in. Dominic was standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of water. His hand tightened on the glass, just slightly, just enough that she noticed. Then he set it down and said something easy in response and moved on. But she had seen it, that brief moment of tension, the careful way he had set the glass down instead of just putting it down. She did not say anything, looked back at her laptop, let it go, but she filed it away, the same way he seemed to file everything about her away, in a place she could return to if she needed it. That night, she could not sleep. The tea helped, usually, but tonight the problem was not normal insomnia. The problem was that her entire life had been restructured in 72 hours, and she was living in a penthouse with a man who remembered what she ate for breakfast 7 years ago, and she did not know what to do with any of it. She made tea anyway, stood in the kitchen in the dark, looking out at the city lights spread below like scattered diamonds. Cannot sleep. She turned. Dominic was standing in the doorway in dark sleep pants and nothing else, and she very carefully kept her eyes on his face. The tea usually helps, she said. Usually? When the problem is normal insomnia, less effective when the problem is that your entire life got restructured in 72 hours. He moved into the kitchen, poured himself water from the tap, leaned against the counter across from her, regretting the signature, regretting that it was necessary. That is not the same thing. No, she agreed. It is not. They stood in his kitchen in the dark, and the silence was different than it had been before, less weighted, more like the kind of quiet that exists between people who have run out of reasons to pretend they do not know each other. Why did you leave? He asked finally. She had known the question was coming, had felt it hovering at the edges of every conversation since she had walked into that conference room and found him standing there. My father had a stroke, she said. My mother needed help. Someone had to go home. You could have told me. Could I? She looked at him directly. We kissed once, Dominic. We never talked about it. We barely talked about anything that was not work. I did not know what we were, and I did not have time to figure it out. So, you left. So I left. He was quiet for a long moment. I looked for you, he said finally. Spent 2 months trying to find you. You had deleted everything, changed your number, withdrawn from the program. It was like you had decided to disappear. I had to. I know that now. She set down her tea. How long have you known about the fraud case? 4 days before the hearing was scheduled. And you bought the firm in 3. I bought the firm in 18 hours, he corrected. The paperwork took 3 days. She looked at him across the dark kitchen, and something in her chest did something complicated. Why? She asked again. He met her eyes. You know why. Say it anyway. Because 7 years ago you left without saying goodbye. And I spent 7 years building something that would make me the kind of person who could find you again. And when I finally did, someone was trying to destroy you. His voice was quiet. That was unacceptable. The apartment was very quiet. Dominic, you do not have to say anything. He pushed off the counter. Get some sleep, Mira. He was halfway to the door when she spoke. It was not just the stroke. He stopped. My father had a stroke, and we needed help. And that was true. But that was not all of it. She was looking at her hands. I was 21 and terrified. Of you. Of how much I wanted to stay. Of how easy it would have been to choose you over everything else. She looked up. So I left before I had to make that choice. Dominic stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and kissed her. It was nothing like the first time. That had been tentative, exploratory. 2 people testing the edges of something they did not fully understand. This was 7 years of waiting compressed into a single point of contact. His hand came up to cup her face. Her fingers curled into the waistband of his sleep pants. Everything else fell away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Do not leave again, he said quietly. I am contracted for 6 months. I am not talking about the contract. She looked up at him, at the face she had spent 7 years trying to forget and never quite managed. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. He kissed her again, slower this time, and she felt something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 7 years finally loosen. If this moment just gave you chills, smash that subscribe button. because the story is about to get even more intense. The next morning, Mira woke up with a specific kind of energy. The kind that came from finally saying the thing you had been holding for 7 years. The kind that made you feel lighter and also slightly reckless. She found Dominic in his office, already working, already dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her first car. He looked up when she walked in. She was wearing his shirt from yesterday, the white one, the one that hit her mid-thigh and made his jaw do something interesting. "Good morning," she said, and sat on the edge of his desk, right on top of the papers he had been reviewing. He looked at her, then at the papers, then back at her. "Mira." "Yes, I am working. I can see that." She picked up his coffee mug, took a sip, made a face. "You know, for a billionaire, your coffee tastes like corporate ambition and regret." His mouth twitched, almost smiled. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Then I will keep this brief." She set down his mug, directly on a contract. "I am having lunch with a friend today." "What friend?" "Just a friend. From architecture school. You do not know him." She watched his knuckles whiten slightly on the pen he was holding. "Him. Yes, him. Marcus. No, wait. Matthew." She tilted her head. "Actually, I cannot remember. Does it matter?" Dominic set down his pen with the careful precision of someone exercising significant control. "No," he said. "It does not matter." "Good." She slid off his desk, kissed his cheek. "Have a good meeting." She was halfway to the door when he spoke. "Mira." She looked back, smiled, the kind of smile that was all innocence and absolutely no regret. "Yes, darling." His eyes were very dark. "Enjoy your lunch." She did, very much. She met her friend Oliver at a cafe downtown. Oliver was harmless, gay, in a committed relationship, but Dominic did not know that, and Mira did not mention it when she sent him a photo of her and Oliver laughing over wine at 2 in the afternoon. His response came 30 seconds later. "Having fun?" She typed back. "The most." She came home at 4, found Dominic in the living room. He looked up when she walked in, looked at her for a long moment, then back at his laptop. "Good lunch?" he asked. "Wonderful. Oliver says hello. Does he?" She sat down on the couch across from him, picked up a magazine from the coffee table, started flipping through it. "You know," she said conversationally, "I was thinking about redecorating a bit. This space is very minimalist. It is clean. It is sterile." She gestured vaguely. "Maybe some color, some plants. Maybe I will rearrange the bookshelves." Dominic looked up. "The bookshelves are organized alphabetically." She wrinkled her nose. "So boring. I think by color would be better." "You are not reorganizing my bookshelves by color." "Why not? I live here now. For 6 months. Remember?" She watched him process that, watched something shift behind his eyes, something that recognized exactly what she was doing and was deciding how long to let her do it. "Mira," he said, and his voice had dropped into a register that made her stomach flip. "Yes, you are playing a game. Am the first?" She looked back at her magazine. "I am just making myself at home. Like you said." She spent the next 2 days testing every boundary she could find. She hummed off key while he was on business calls. She left her coffee mug on his desk. She reorganized his kitchen cabinets so the glasses were where the plates used to be. She wore his clothes and left hers on the bathroom floor and asked him questions during important video meetings. On the 3rd day, she actually did rearrange his bookshelves by color. It took her 3 hours. She stepped back to admire her work right as he walked in. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the bookshelves, looked at her, said nothing. She smiled brightly. "Better, right? Much more visual interest." Dominic walked over to the shelves, looked at them for a long moment, then turned to her. "You put the architecture books with the fiction, but they are both blue. Mira, I am improving your space. You should be thanking me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke briefly. "What was that?" she asked when he hung up. "Canceling my afternoon." "Why?" He looked at her, really looked at her, with the kind of focus that made her suddenly aware of how much space was between them and how quickly he could cross it. "Because you have been testing me for 3 days, and I think it is time we addressed that." Her pulse kicked up, just slightly. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "No?" He stepped closer. the shirt you are wearing, the lunch with your friend, the coffee mug on my desk, moving my things, interrupting my calls. I'm just making myself comfortable. You are pushing to see what I will do. Another step closer. Am the first. Yes. She lifted her chin. And what are you going to do? He smiled. It was not a particularly nice smile. Remind you exactly who you are dealing with. The charity gala was that evening, one of those events that required attendance, where being seen mattered, where his girlfriend needed to be on his arm, looking appropriately smitten. Mira chose her dress specifically to make a point. Red, fitted, the kind of thing that required confidence and made every eye in a room track your movement. She walked out of her bedroom at 7, found Dominic waiting by the door, watched his entire body go very, very still. You are wearing that, he said. Not a question, a statement. She smiled. Problem? His eyes moved over her. Slow, deliberate, the kind of look that felt physical. No, he said finally. No problem. But his hand on her lower back in the car was not gentle. It was possessive, claiming, the kind of touch that said mine in a language that did not need words. The gala was exactly what she expected. Champagne and small talk, and people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. She was charming, social. She laughed at the right moments. She touched arms and leaned in and played the part of Dominic's girlfriend with the same precision she brought to everything. And she danced with other men, not provocatively, not inappropriately, just danced. The way you do at these events. A colleague of Dominic's, someone from the hosting organization, an old acquaintance who recognized her from architecture school. She could feel Dominic watching from across the room, could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. She danced with a man named Jonathan, someone harmless, someone boring. But she laughed at something he said, touched his shoulder, looked up at him with the smile she had been giving everyone all night. And then Dominic was there. He did not ask permission, did not wait for the song to end. Just cut in with the kind of quiet authority that made Jonathan step back immediately without question. We are leaving, Dominic said. The event is not over. We are leaving now. His hand was on her elbow, firm, guiding her toward the exit before she could protest, before she could say anything. She should have been angry, should have pushed back, but she felt something else entirely, something that recognized she had been pushing for 3 days and had finally pushed far enough. The car ride back was silent, charged, the kind of silence that made every second feel longer than it was. They did not speak in the elevator, did not speak walking into the penthouse. The door closed behind them. Did you enjoy yourself tonight? He asked, too calm, too controlled. I was being social. That is what girlfriends do. He moved, backed her against the wall, hands bracketing her head. The same position from 7 years ago, but with none of the hesitation, none of the uncertainty. You have been testing me for 3 days, he said. Her breath caught, leaving your things everywhere. My shirt, the friend for lunch, touching my workspace, that dress, dancing with him, each item a count against her, each one delivered in that same quiet voice that made her stomach flip. I was just what? Seeing how far you could push before I reminded you exactly who you belong to. The shift, her teasing confidence evaporating into something else, something that recognized she had been playing a game she was not going to win. His proximity, his control slipping into something raw, something she had only seen glimpses of. You wanted my attention, Mira. You have it, all of it. He kissed her, not gentle, not sweet, claiming, answering every challenge she had issued over 3 days with the kind of focus that made her knees weak. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Still think this is funny? He asked. She shook her head, could not quite manage words. Good, because the next time you want to play games, remember, I do not lose. Later, much later, they were on the couch. She was curled against him, his arm around her. The game over, the point made. I am sorry, she said quietly. For what specifically? For pushing, for testing you, for, she stopped, for being scared. His arm tightened around her. Of what? That this is not real, that you will wake up and realize you made a mistake, that 6 months will end and you will be done. He turned her face toward his, made her look at him. Mira, I spent 7 years looking for you. 7 years building myself into someone who could find you. Someone who could keep you. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. You think 6 months is going to be enough? You think I am going to let you go? What if I am not what you think I am? You are exactly what I think you are. Sharp, stubborn, brilliant, infuriating. His mouth twitched. Mine. She looked at him for a long moment, saw the truth in his eyes, the certainty. I never moved on, Mira. 7 years. Not once. There were women who were not you. Every single one of them. Not you. Her throat tightened. When I found out someone was destroying you, he continued, there was no question, no hesitation. I would have bought 10 firms, 20, whatever it took. Why? You know why. She did, but she needed to hear it. Say it anyway. Because I love you, he said. Have loved you since we were 21, and you argued with me about structural load capacity for 45 minutes, and I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life finding things to argue with you about. She laughed, a watery sound. That is the worst romantic confession I have ever heard. It is the truth. She kissed him then, soft, real, without games. I love you too, she said against his mouth. Even though you are controlling and manipulative and bought my entire company, I prefer decisive and thorough. Of course you do. Sometimes the person we push away is the one we need most. If you are feeling this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. 2 weeks later, Dominic came home early. Unusual. He was never home before 7. Mira looked up from her laptop. You are never home before 7. Special occasion. What occasion? He handed her a folder. She opened it. Scanned the first page. Her eyes went wide. You found them. My security team found them. The people who framed you. Complete evidence trail, including the actual perpetrator. Who? Richard Moss. Your colleague. The one who wanted senior analyst. She remembered Richard. Quiet, competent, always just slightly behind her in every metric that mattered. He framed me for a promotion? He framed you because you were in his way. Dominic sat down beside her. It is over, Mira. Your name is completely clear. The firm is issuing a formal apology tomorrow. The regulatory board is closing the case. She should feel relief, vindication, something triumphant. Instead, her stomach dropped. So the contract is fulfilled. Technically, his voice was carefully neutral. You are free to leave whenever you want. She looked at the folder in her hands, at the proof of her innocence, at the door back to her old life standing wide open, looked at the man beside her who had rearranged his entire world to save hers. What if I do not want to leave? Something shifted in his expression. The contract was for 6 months. I am aware. We are 3 weeks in. I can count, Dominic. So what are you saying? She set the folder aside, turned to face him fully. I am saying that 7 years ago, I left because I was scared. I am saying that 3 weeks ago you bought an entire company because someone tried to hurt me. I am saying that I have spent 21 days living in your space, drinking tea you somehow knew I needed, sleeping at temperatures you had no business knowing about, and eating food I mentioned once 7 years ago. She took a breath. I am saying that maybe this time, I am brave enough to choose you. He was very still. You are sure? I am terrified, she corrected. But yes, I am sure. He pulled her into his lap, buried his face in her neck. She felt him breathe out, like he had been holding that breath for 7 years. I love you, he said against her skin. In case that was not clear, she laughed. The sound, half relief, half joy. I love you too. Even though you are controlling and manipulative and bought my company, I prefer decisive and thorough. Of course you do. He pulled back to look at her. Stay. I just said I would. Say it again anyway. She cupped his face in her hands. I am staying, Dominic. I am not going anywhere. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. She kissed him back and thought about doors closing and doors opening, and how sometimes the scariest choice is the right one. 3 months later, Mira stood in a gallery in front of her largest piece, an architectural installation that combined design and sculpture and everything she had been working toward for 5 years. Her own firm, her own vision, built on her terms, The opening was packed. Curators, collectors, people who mattered in ways that used to terrify her and now just felt like validation. She felt him before she saw him, that familiar pull. The shift in air pressure that meant Dominic had entered the room. He appeared at her elbow with champagne, pressed a glass into her hand, kissed her temple. "Congratulations," he murmured. "It is extraordinary. You are biased. Completely. Does not make it less true." She leaned into him, let herself feel the solid warmth of him beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him, at the man who had rearranged his world for her, who had been patient when she needed patience and decisive when she needed saving, who had spent 7 years carrying the memory of her and never put it down. "I am thinking that I am exactly where I am supposed to be." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that was only ever for her. "Good," he said, "because I am never letting you go." 6 months later, on a Saturday morning, Mira was making coffee when she noticed something. A small velvet box on the counter, half hidden behind the coffee maker. She picked it up, opened it, saw the ring. Dominic walked in, saw what she was holding, did not look surprised. "Were you going to ask," she said, "or just carry that around forever?" "I was waiting for you to stop being smug about finding it." She laughed. "Never, so ask anyway." He crossed the kitchen, took the box from her hands, got down on one knee. "Marry me, Mira. Make this permanent. Only if you promise to let me rearrange your office. Never, then yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, stood, kissed her, like they had all the time in the world, which now they did. "You know this means you are stuck with me," she said against his mouth. "I was stuck with you 7 years ago. This just makes it official." She pulled back to look at him. "I love you." "I know," he said. "I have known since you were 21 and too stubborn to say it. And you waited anyway. I would have waited longer. Good thing you did not have to." "Good thing," he agreed, and kissed her again. And standing in his kitchen, their kitchen, with morning light streaming through windows and the future spread out in front of them like an unwritten blueprint, Mira Castellano thought about running and staying and all the ways love asks you to be brave. She thought about the girl who left at 21 because she was terrified of choosing wrong. She thought about the woman who signed a contract at 26 because she had run out of options. She thought about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you were always meant to be. Mira learned that sometimes the person who challenges you most is exactly who you need. That running from love does not protect you. It robs you. That being brave enough to stay, to trust, to choose someone every single day, that is where real life begins. If this story moved you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in Mira's position? Would you have signed the contract? Would you have stayed? Would you have been brave enough to choose love? Subscribe to Mr. Andy Love Stories for more tales of love, redemption, and second chances that will restore your faith in happy endings. Share this with someone who needs to remember. It is never too late to choose love. It is never too late to come home. Until next time, choose bravery, choose love, choose you.